So welcome back to part 3 of cellular respiration. And the last time that we left off with the electrons, the high energy electrons being taken away from pyruvate and being transferred into the NADH, FADH2 molecules, these electron carriers. And so these electron carriers are now going to take these electrons and drop them off at the ETC, at the electron transport chain. Now you notice on this cycle that there's a number of complexes, or a fancy way of just saying the proteins that are going to be passing off these high energy electrons along the line, along that chain, to a waiting oxygen atom. And that oxygen atom will then couple with hydrogen to make a water molecule. And so by the time it gets to that point, that electron is already low energy. If you remember in lecture class, we discussed, or we made an analogy of a child sliding down a playground slide. So at the top of the slide, they're high energy, and by the time they get to the bottom of the slide, they're low energy. But as going back to their high energy state, as they're moving their way down, those complexes, those proteins, those embedded proteins in the phospholipid bilayer in the inner membrane of the mitochondria are releasing hydrogen ions into the inner membrane space. And as those hydrogen ions build up in that space, they're creating a concentration gradient, a pressure gradient. And your cell doesn't want that. The mitochondria doesn't want that. So it's got to have a pressure release valve. And that release valve is going to be the ATP synthase. And that ATP synthase, that turbine is going to spin, and it's going to cause ADP and phosphate to combine to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And that is where that energy is going to get stored into that ATP molecule. And you'll notice here on the petals that that ATP molecule is the molecule that makes everything in the human body move. So let's take a closer look at that electron transport chain real quick. So again, here we are looking at that electron transport chain. Don't get caught up on the complex labeling system, the complex 1, 3, and 4. Just remember that those proteins are a chain of proteins that are going to carry those electrons one step to the next. And as they proceed, they're going to be losing energy. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. So at the bottom, you see the NADH and FADH2. These molecules are going to come by and drop off their high energy electrons. Okay, and they're going to drop off those hydrogens that they had. Remember FADH2? Well, now it's FAD because it dropped off the hydrogens. And so these high energy electrons, as we mentioned before, are like a child at the top of the slide. And as they make their way down, they are pushing hydrogens across the membrane into the inner membrane space from the matrix. So at the inner membrane space, at the very top, that dark pink, as more hydrogens build up, they're creating that pressure gradient that we were discussing earlier. Now look at the bottom there where you see that oxygen element or atom. That oxygen element is acting like a magnet for that high energy electron. It is attracted to that high energy electron, and they're going to meet. And again, by the time that electron gets there, it's going to be low energy, and it's going to combine with two hydrogens and that oxygen to make H2O. And that, if you remember, that is one of the byproducts of cellular respiration. And again, as the next electron makes its way down, it's going to combine with another two hydrogens, making more water. So water is that waste product. So now let's take a look at the ATP synthase. That's one part of the story. Now let's look at what's happening at the other part, probably the most important part. So as that hydrogen concentration gradient builds up on the inner membrane space, that concentration gradient wants to be released, and the ATP synthase does that. And if you recall, it's kind of like a turbine, and it transfers the energy from that pressure gradient into an ADP molecule and phosphate, making ATP. And this is where most of your ATP are produced, anywhere from 34 to 38. Again, as we mentioned before, it is a range. It could go higher or lower depending on the person's conditioning. So I hope this helps. Go back and reference the cycle, the second half of the cycle, the electron transport chain. That cycle, those complexes, we're just taking a closer look at what's actually happening in that complex. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and good luck in your studying.